So winning over an internal candidate is not straightforward. First, they might know all the questions in advance, and I actually worked with such people and prepared exactly the ones they would receive during their interview. Second reason could be that time is usually on their side because internal candidates might know about the opportunity well before you do, and of course have, at least in theory, time to prepare accordingly. And third, they could even invite you just because they want to confirm they're hiring the right person, that is their internal candidate. So all in all, there are apparently at least more reasons for an internal candidate to be successful. However, let me dive a bit deeper into each of these 3 points I mentioned, as you might be surprised about what's actually going to matter during an actual interview. So first, for receiving all the questions in advance. As I said, yes, this does unfortunately happen, and that might sound like an totally unfair advantage here. However, in my experience, that is far less significant than it sounds. Why would you ask? Because candidates can actually predict around 95% of questions you're going to get asked during the interview. Of course, so know as you know where to look for them and how to read a little bit between the lines. Because in reality, there aren't as many behavioral questions as you might expect. In fact, it's more common for interviewers to rephrase them so they sound differently. Okay, and I'll talk about this a bit later. But to give you a specific example here, Amazon, for instance, asks questions from their leadership principles. Someone could know the questions they're going to receive in advance, but you're also a few clicks away from finding out all possible questions around their leadership principles as well. They're no longer a secret. And by the way, Amazon is somewhere where behavioral interviews are some of the most intense out there. So it's not uncommon for candidates in Amazon interviews to prepare 100% of the questions they're getting asked without knowing them in advance, maybe a little bit except the ones from the bar raisers, which might be slightly modified. Okay, so as you can see here, knowing the questions in advance is not a decisive advantage by any means here. Okay. Second, as for time, yes, internal candidates will usually have a bit more time to prepare than you do, but as someone speaking to thousands, I will tell you that it's rare. Actually, it's extremely rare for people to prepare for more than a few days for behavioral interviews in particular. Most of you will take this as a one-off thing, often 2-3 days before the interview. If you start your prep 3 days before the interview, you basically have zero chances to become good with behavioral interviews, even if you're not competing with internal candidates. Okay. Another point for you here. The best candidate in a job interview is the one with the best stories. Okay, so stories do take a tremendous amount of time to come up with, and especially to revise them. However, doing it right, you'll be significantly more likely to bias the interviewers towards you and get the job. Okay, and by the way, you'll also have an exit strategy in the sense that subsequent interviews will require you practically no further prep, at least on the behavioral side. Okay. Now, on the other extreme, some of you could invest months to prepare and still yet perform poorly during the interview. Okay. Couple of common mistakes. You have no story bank, just a ton of answers to as many questions as possible. Okay. And actually, Google used to do the same mistake. They used to advise answering as many questions on their career page, which they actually changed recently. And if you think this is an isolated issue, that of quality of the interview prep, I'll give another example, sponsored by the US Department of Labor, which is the first result you'll come across on Google. Okay, so I guess my point is that qualitative prep for the behavioral part in particular is still something pretty isolated. So you could definitely take advantage of this, even if you have less time to prepare than an internal candidate. Okay. Second point here would be that ChatGPT is an expert in convincing first vague answers. Okay, which, by the way, if you clone, will not hold during a proper interview. Okay, so regardless if you have all the questions in advance here. Or another scenario, which is a bit more rare, okay, but still happens, is for someone to over-prepare these answers. That's when they become scripted and basically inefficient. Dan, will you please introduce yourself? I'm an effective senior program manager with over 20 years of experience delivering complex programs for both government and the private sector, with successful track record of delivering multiple programs heavily geared towards IT, cloud, and business transformation, from design to implementation to handover and revenge recognition. So as you can see here, there's plenty of ways to differentiate yourself from someone in a behavioral interview, even if you don't have months to prepare, okay? And finally here, with respect to my third point here, I said that they could invite you just because they want a confirmation, because their guy is better. If indeed the other guy is really good, which isn't the case in my experience, they might not appreciate an extra interview, which they could as well prepare and interview with other companies as well, okay? And if there's one thing I've learned over time, is that best candidates do line up multiple job offers and pick the best of them. So they might not be so interested in this job in the first place, okay? But during the interview, as I said, the best story wins, okay? Now, in reality, it's not enough to prepare the best stories if you don't know exactly when to use them, okay? I'm basically pitching listening skills here. The moment you know why they ask you some question, that's also when you're most likely going to give them what they want to hear, and therefore maximize your chances to bias them towards you too, okay? Let's try a quick listening exercise here. A time when you had to make trade-offs between quality and costs. Why would someone ask you this? Another example, a time when you made trade-offs between quality and deadlines. Why would someone ask you this? So the idea here is to become this good so you can educate and give them exactly what they want to hear, right? And just as a closing remark, the story of internal candidates always getting the job is a bit like the story of candidates who think they are hired even before the interview, okay? Then it's just a formality, they really, really like me. Or a good friend of mine is on the interview panel, okay? In my experience, there's always been competition for high-paying jobs, okay? So hopefully you found this information useful, and thank you very much for watching.